Much to the previous speakers. Sometimes I find that I learn more about the bill after the Select Committee, but it's all good learning. And it is important for the Green Party to speak up on all stages of this bill because we are voting against it. Including one where, in fact, we did not have large numbers of submitters at the Select Committee, but there were people with very serious interests in some of the important specific issues that have been raised about Part 1. And I think the Select Committee process was useful in the sense that there were some improvements made to the bill, and on a number of issues a general consensus forming around issues such as information matching for teachers and the changes to the vetting of people associated with home care and working on school premises. And following on from previous speakers, it did remind me of experiences in the bad old days when in some schools that I was connected with, it took 12-year-old girls with a tape recorder in a classroom having to prove to boards and school committees and the education department that there were abusive teachers actually saying abusive things. And then they might have managed to get rid of, we did in fact manage to get rid of some teachers like that from our school, but we did not have the knowledge or confidence that information matching then would mean that those teachers' behaviour wouldn't continue in another school. So it's good to see that we've come a long way on that issue and there is progress, because it's appalling that in those days that some of our children had to take a tape recorder into the classroom in order to be believed about some of the abuse that is possible towards children in schools in this country. So, we welcome those aspects of the bill and have no problem with them. As the only party that's actually voting against the bill, we need to reiterate that we did find some parts inoffensive and some very useful, but that we and some of the submitters were not persuaded by what is called, quote, minor changes, unquote, to the Education Amendment Act. The Quality Public Education Coalition and the Green Party are concerned about the sections of the bill relating to school governance. There was never any real explanation of the board combining issues or the body corporate control clauses in the governance section on the bill. Other parties have spoken as if this language is just some convenient phrasing which reflects the status quo and which creates choice for communities, rather than a potentially serious opportunity to change the governance from public institution to potentially privately controlled structures. And just as the Green Party stands against free trade and for fair trade, and just as we stand against unsustainable growth and for genuine progress indicators, we stand for public ownership and governance of the public school system. And this is not to say that we have no critique of that system. We strongly critique the system for its inability to meet the needs of many young people whose voices we hear. We consider that tangata whenua tamariki and rangatahi in particular have not been nurtured to their full potential by an education system which has embedded problems with monocultural ignorance and a strong Pākehā learning framework and bias, which is currently seen as so normal that it's barely recognised, particularly in some high schools. However, this legislation does nothing to improve that situation and could also have serious and long-term unintended consequences. We could debate whether the term body corporate will have major effects, but the Green Party stands with the submitters from the Quality Public Education Coalition who were concerned that the legislation was legitimising corporate control in public schools. The practical example they raised with me when we discussed the legislation was what happened when schools are considered to be failing. Under this legislation, the Board of Trustees can be taken over by a statutory manager, which may and well be necessary at times. But if that manager is a body corporate, the risk of private control becomes more explicitly provided for than in the Education Act to date. So why would we open a door to a different governance model which moves governance further from the local community? What if a school was considered to be failing because it worked with a different cultural bias than the current framework and it was taken over by an efficient, quote-unquote, private management group who had no experience of the educational needs of children from that community? It was argued at the Select Committee by just about everybody else except me that so long as some individual was made accountable, everything would be okay, because accountability is about knowing for whom is responsible, but not necessarily knowing the impact of the kind of model of responsibility that we may be facilitating in this legislation. And that's where the Greens and other submitters beg to differ from the government. We also agree with QPEC, that's the Quality Public Education Coalition, that combining school boards risks the autonomy of communities where a combined board might, Mr Chair,
Catherine Delahunty.
might sound efficient, but risks the takeover of a unique community to one where the parents who are not directly involved are making key decisions about a school in their district. The governance on a combined board could dilute the purpose of the Board of Trustees in allowing more distant interests and priorities, let alone more corporate ones, to dominate. Today at the Select Committee, the Education and Science Select Committee, my colleague Sue Kedgley presented the school foods petition, and one issue she highlighted was the way vested interests can dictate the food our children buy in schools. Now that we have abolished the healthy food guidelines as they were written by the previous government, contractors can make more money out of widely promoted junk food than they do from healthy choices. Shall we expand that to contracting all education services? And who will benefit from that? So returning to the issue of unintended consequences which can bedevil legislation, imagine the nightmare scenario if we ended up with an accelerating progression towards an act utopia in education. Individual parents would seek so-called choice in a chaotic and privatised education system where survival of the fittest in the top of the league table schools have taken over. Behind guarded walls, the children of the rich would choose beautiful, well-resourced schools, and the poor would end up in the drafty hall down the road. Oh my God, that's starting to happen already. And the language of this Act may further facilitate the degradation in the public system towards schools as businesses, some of which will inevitably fail. But what the heck? That's the market. And those children who suffer educational inequity can just pull themselves up by their future-focused, undeserving bootstraps. No, thank you. We will stand on our ground and we will vote against the bill. Kia ora.